Good morning, everybody. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, and thanks for joining us this morning for the Sustainability for Horse Show Facilities and Our Industry, presented by Mars Equestrian. Big shout out to Mars Equestrian for sponsoring this panel and their long-standing commitment to supporting sustainable initiatives in our industry. I'd like to introduce our panelists for today. We have Megan Fellows, who's a former Grand Prix show jumper and the founder and CEO of Carbon Hoofprint, a consulting and development firm dedicated to creating systemic and measurable changes and solutions for the equestrian industry in the sustainability space. Scott Evans, the creative director of Green is the New Blue, an environmental nonprofit which strives to reduce the environmental impact of equine-related activities and events. And Lee Carter, the president of the Kentucky Horse Park and former executive director of EEI, the competition organizer for the Kentucky 3-day event. To go ahead and get started, I'm going to welcome Megan up to the stage for her presentation, and then we'll have 3 presentations, and then we'll open it up for questions. Thank you, everybody.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Megan Fellows, the founder of Carbon Hoofprint, and I'm excited for the panel today. Love these guys over here, and I think we have a great spectrum of things that we're all working on, and I think I'm going to come up and just share a little bit about myself, what I've been working on, and then hopefully set the stage for the panel to give us a little bit of a shared language for what we can be talking about, and then the reality of the situation and the opportunities that we have ahead of us. So Carbon Hoofprint, I thought I'd start off with just sharing something that I know we're all passionate about. I didn't know if I'd be nervous or not, and I was like, let me talk about horses, and that would get me in the flow. So true pony girl at heart. My sister, my mom, and I all grew up riding. I did hunter jumpers in Virginia. I thought this is the quintessential photo of the eating a bacon, egg, and cheese on the hay bale outside of a trailer here that people might relate to. And so grew up riding. It was just our life. It taught us responsibility. We took care of our horses. We were at the barn for 9 hours a day on Saturdays and Sundays. I moved on to do a little bit of a higher level. I would be way too scared to do that now, I think, but you know, this horse La Supra is still retired at my mom's farm in Middleburg, so we have a lot of lawn ornaments that are our pets for life, that we just really love them. I stopped riding. I got into the corporate world, and I worked at a clean tech incubator in Boston called Greentown Labs that really inspired me to get into the work of climate and sustainability. It was a lab space that had 40 to 50 different startups that were working on energy, water, waste. So there were floating wind turbines and things that were material science focused. And I saw the passion of the entrepreneurs that were just dedicating their lives to trying to do things that are bettering the world. And I was really inspired by that. I then worked with National Geographic for 2.5 years on a project, so I saw the conservation side, and it was really cool to work with the explorers themselves of the people that are trying to preserve things of our planet. And then COVID hit, and I started to go back to horse shows and saying, why aren't we doing better here? I think there are things that we can be doing, and just for us to think about the shared language that we can use and what does sustainability mean for our horse sport. And I think, you know, to me, it is to ensure that we can continue to thrive and grow as a sport while reducing the environmental impacts that we have on our society and the environment. The hard truth, we're a little bit behind as a sport. We're all working on it in pieces. These other organized sports that are up here is really cool and I think inspiring for us to see. And as we have the next couple of annual meetings, how do we work towards something that's a coordinated initiative for US Equestrian as a sport? You have Major League Baseball, you have the NFL, you have the NHL. They all have these dedicated groups that are working in coordinated ways. Our sport is different. We have animals. There's a whole different piece to it that makes it hard. I'll get into it more of why that is. But the opportunity here also is that we have people that are part of this group that have the biggest opportunity to make a big difference. Like people, they're affluent, powerful, care about land, care about animals, and we are the ones who can come together to really make some changes. Why is it so difficult? Those who have been horse show people, as most of you are, know that it's a bit of a traveling circus. You pick things up, you move it around. There are so many players to this game. You have events, you have people, you have grooms, you have trainers, you have horse show organizers, and on the animal side of it that other sports don't have, you have bedding, you have animal waste, you have feed. There are all these pieces that make it difficult, and so it is very fragmented. And how do we bring that all together and start to look at the different steps and pieces, and really, I think the sequence is going to be important about how we make it work. We'll go into some case studies, I think, between Evan and Scott and Lee, but here's just an overview of why it is complicated, that there are so many categories to look at. And I put this up here not for it to be overwhelming, but also to realize that there are so many opportunities in different places where people can take a step in and actually see where they can make a difference. So again, this is venues, it's the barns, it's the brands and products that are going into it. Everyone can kind of make a difference in these areas. A little bit on carbon hoof print. This happened pretty organically. I was coming back into the horse world, and it started out more as a mentorship. I was looking at other young equestrians and saying, how do I get them into roles of sustainability or climate where they could either study it in school or find a job. And then people were coming to me and saying, hey, I'm thinking about solar on my barn. Can you help with that? I'm a math and science person, and I got into the development side, so I began working directly with people on their barns, on venues, and everything from the LED lights. So let's look at EV charging, let's look at solar, let's look at the water, and what are the pieces that are a good priority for you? And it's not a one-size-fits-all. It's a look at each different venue or brand or barn and say, what are the priorities that might be best for you? I think Leah's going to go into this process more with what we're doing with a group with the Kentucky Horse Park, but this is a repeatable process that I think everyone can do by choosing a simple priority and just find a new one and audit, strategy, implement. Audit, strategy, implement. How do we find the different pieces within your organization and do that over and over again, and hopefully over time we can make big change. This is an example of an activation that I did at Wellington International with a group called Hope Hydration, who's a water refill station. They also have brandable screens, which I think as part of the panel and discussion I'd love to talk about also from a revenue generating standpoint. These solutions don't always just take money. There are ways that they can also help to make money. And I can share it after, but something like this, I just really like the example of too, that there's measurable results from it. You can start to see how many water bottles have been saved, how many have been saved over week 1, over week 2, over week 14, and then you have a slide on a deck that becomes a larger deck of sustainability that you can share with sponsors. And new sponsors start to come and say, what are you guys doing for sustainability? New high net worth individuals that might want to contribute, start asking questions. And you have a deck with measurable results that say, here are things that we're doing, and you can see how that relates back to CO2 and emissions. But it's just something that's measurable, it's sponsorable, you can make money from it, and it's visible for people on site at these horse shows so they can see that you're doing something and they can talk about it. On the other side of the spectrum, something that I've been working on for years now, I'd never thought I'd be getting into this, is the horse manure side of it. I didn't realize how big of a challenge it was in the horse world. And it's something that we muck out stalls every day and it goes somewhere and we don't really know what happens to it. The truth is there isn't a great solution. In Florida, they're just bringing it to the county dump. And it's really expensive, and it's different from other types of waste and manure. I think it'll be more of a panel discussion topic to say why it's difficult. And we laughed about it in one of the prep sessions to say, like, we're landing things on Mars, but we don't know what to do with our horse manure. And it's just kind of crazy to me. So it's been something I've been really diving into for the past 2 to 3 years. The biggest challenge is the fact that it's the wood shavings mixed in, doesn't break down as easily, so it's not great for fertilizer and soil. And there's a whole thing with how it works with the digesters that's different from other animal waste. So I think we'll talk about that. It's something that every barn, every horse show has to deal with, and it's an expense. And from a technology and innovation standpoint, it'll be fun to kind of talk about what's being done and hopefully how communities like this can support how we help more of these different technologies get off the ground, because there are a few different pieces that are part of it that are important and going to need community support. I have a little tub of the biochar here that I might pass around so people can see too of what the byproduct is of one of these digesters, which is pretty exciting to make it a fully circular program. The next slide was just going to be about Kentucky Horse Park and introducing Lee, so I can just do that verbally too. Here we go. Great. And I think I just wanted to say a thank you to US Equestrian and like this annual meeting, honestly, because that is how this collaboration started. I think it was at this meeting 2 years ago. Tom Amara and Bill Maroney knew what I was working on and introduced me to Kathy Meyer and the Kentucky Horse Park Foundation, Jackie McFarland, Debbie Sailing, and saying they were really interested in doing a sustainability program at the horse park. Let's all connect and make it happen. And it is a slow process, but making changes, and I'm really excited to see where it's headed in the future. And I will not steal any of Lee's thunder, but he can share some of the progress that we've been making at the Kentucky Horse Park.
It's early. I applaud you for coming out to talk about, excuse my frankness, but horse shit, because we all deal with it. And I will say to you right up front, I am the least qualified person to speak on this panel by far. Megan and Scott are stellar in their field. Have learned a lot. As Megan said, this process began a couple years ago in earnest with the Kentucky Horse Park Foundation as well, for us to begin to explore sustainability at the Kentucky Horse Park. And just kind of put some things in perspective, and Megan said it as well, that there's no one-size-fits-all solution. There are different things for each property, each venue, each barn that you could implement and you could explore. From the horse park perspective, obviously size and capacity is a big thing. You know, we annually bring 1.7 million people to the park. Over 20,000 horses come to the park each year. They stay, in 2024, they stayed 174,000 stall nights. So to put that in perspective, you're staying here, you may be staying here at the Omni Louisville Hotel. It has 612 guest rooms. So in terms of what we could do, we could put a horse in every guest room of this hotel for 284 consecutive nights. So again, when you begin to talk about an operation like that and a scale like that, you have to begin to break down some of the challenges into very small areas, which is what we've been doing for the last couple of years. There's some terminology that I'll use here briefly that I just want to bring you, make you aware of, so we're all on the same page. You might hear me refer to ESPC. ESPC is Energy Savings Performance Contract, which that is the process that the park has been undergoing for roughly the last 6 months to a year. So this kind of just shows you our timeline. In the summer of 2025, we issued an RFP soliciting energy savings companies to come in and put a proposal in front of the park outlining areas that we could improve our sustainability. That RFP went out in roughly August. In fall of 2025, there was a committee, a selection committee that met and interviewed each of the 3 groups that were interested in pursuing that, and it was awarded. It was awarded to a company called Schneider Electric, who is vast in that space, and they've been great to partner with. Once that contract was awarded to Schneider, they had a 90-day period to complete an audit. And that audit included them coming in, looking at all of our operations, our mechanical, our electric, our muck, our water, some of the challenges we had with sewer, the building envelope, all those things. And so they presented, after that 90 days, which ended in December, and then with the holidays, they presented to us about 10 days ago, their findings. And so we're now in the process where we're reviewing those findings, trying to see what is and or is not feasible. But we had some key priorities that we wanted to look at going through this process. First was to reduce our energy, water, and maintenance costs. I'll share some numbers with you here in a minute about just the size of those issues that we deal with. Second was to streamline operations through automation and centralized control. We won't talk a great deal about this, but what that is how we control our heating and air within each building. You know, we're a very large campus with 1,200 acres, 35 buildings, all with their own individualized HVAC system. So how do we control that? How do we monitor that on a day-to-day basis? And then lastly, how do we enhance guest and animal comfort, safety, and experience? You know, for us, that is key to what we do, is first off, we're going to care for the horse. We're going to love the horse, and we want to share that with others. So how do we enhance that experience by improving our overall operation? So when Schneider came back to us, they came back to us with 6 different scope of work categories. We're going to talk about 4 of these, but just real briefly, infrastructure improvements, water conservation, mechanical and electrical renovations, building envelope, lighting upgrades, and renewable. The 2 that we're not going to talk about much today, one is the mechanical and electrical upgrades, partly because that's not very wow. There's not a lot of jazz in that to tell you, hey, our air conditioner needs a little work, you know, our heat pumps aren't working. There's just not a lot of fun in that one. And the second is building envelopes. You know, when I say building envelopes, you've all experienced this before, probably at your own home, maybe your office. Have you ever walked up to an exterior door and heard that whistle? Right? That's what we're talking about there. We're talking about the fact that how do we keep that inside air from going out and that outside air going in, right? And that's everything from thresholds to weather stripping to, you know, caulking around certain mechanical pieces. But you've all experienced that and you've seen that in your daily lives. So the first thing we want to talk about is infrastructure improvements, muck management. So the horse park spends roughly $500,000 annually on handling our muck. I think I've got a typo, or maybe I don't. Yeah, it says 8 tons. That's incorrect. It's 8,176 tons of muck that's generated at the horse park per year. Again, I want to try to put things in perspective here. If you convert those tons to pounds, that's roughly 16,352,000 pounds. It goes one step forward. I live in Georgetown. Georgetown is where the Toyota Camrys are made. Average Toyota Camry weighs about 3,000 pounds. So we generate enough muck to essentially bury 5,000 Camrys a year, right? So when Megan talks about this being a industry-wide issue, we are just one facility, right? You go to the other facilities, wherever they are, and what do you do with the muck that you generate? For us, it's a very inefficient process. We touch the muck 4 times before it leaves the property. One person touches it to remove it from the stall, one person touches it to move it to the back, third person touches it to load it into a container, fourth person touches it to take the container out. It's a highly inefficient process using heavy equipment, diesel fuel, all those kinds of emissions that we'd like to avoid. So I've said before that if we can ever figure out how to address this, or whoever figures out how to address this, will be a rich person. Because I've had a lot of people come into my office say, hey, look, and Megan is one of the leaders on this, hey, I've done this biochar in my backyard. And I'm like, that's great. Now let's do it with dirty muck, right? This isn't the muck you might take out of your stall at home. This is muck that as grooms or whomever leaves the horse park is very wet, it's very dirty, it's got trash, it's not clean at all. So how do we take that dirty muck and convert it? In full transparency, the horse park attempted this in 2009 or 10, and the process was different than what Megan has talked about now. The process then was, let's burn the muck to create energy. The end result of that was, it didn't work. I think they ran the plant 2 days. There was so much smoke coming out of the facility that it closed down I-75. That's great, right? And so I think it's one of those things that we have to figure out how do we address this in a way that we can regenerate and put back into the ground. Where our muck currently goes, it doesn't go to a landfill, thankfully. It goes to a gentleman that mushroom farms. He's out on the east end of Fayette County at the county line. He's got a large facility there. He puts it in windrows, turns it, becomes fertilizer for mushroom farms. And so at least we're spending a lot of energy to get it there, but once it gets there, hopefully it's getting put back into the ground. But there are a lot of steps that if we can figure this out, will solve a lot of ills. Next thing is sewer system infiltration. One of the things that the park is challenged with, again, we're a facility that was built in the late 70s, 1978. So we are approaching our 50-year anniversary, which means our sewer lines are approaching their 50-year anniversary. You know, in 1978, I don't think we would have forecasted the growth and the impact of the sewer system. So we see all the time, we have, some of you are tenants at the horse parks, you know how often we got to turn the water off, but we see all the time challenges with aged infrastructure that we have to correct, right? Whether that's cured in place piping that sleeves our sewer lines, whether that's raising up the sewer manholes. There's a creek as you drive along Cigar Lane. There's that creek that runs right past it, right? When it rains, that creek goes up. Probably a year and a half ago, heavy rain, I get a call from my maintenance director who said, hey, you got to come down there and see this. And there was a manhole cover that was essentially its own water feature at the park. Water was just spewing out of the top, and so we have to raise that up. Because what's happening is we're getting infiltration earlier in the system. And why that's important is we are our own water company. So all that flows to a sewer. So we get billed by Kentucky American Water for what they send us, and then we get billed by the sewer company for what we put into it. And there are months where we're putting in more than we're taking. And that's because we've got this infiltration that happens somewhere along the line. Man-of-war fountain's another example. We discovered last fall that we had a leak. We were losing 30,000 gallons a day is the estimate on that fountain, right? So we've got to repair that. Those are things that you don't know. You don't see, hey, there's no puddle of water here because the park also sits on an aquifer, right? So there's water all around the park. So sewer and sewer infiltration is a big thing that I'm hoping this ESPC can address. Water conservation. We have a very natural resource with water. There's a couple different parts of the ESPC that's been proposed. One is rainwater harvesting, just taking the rain that comes. How do we capture that? How do we then reuse that? The concept right now is to put essentially two large rain barrels, for lack of a better term, to capture that as it comes off the All-Tech arena and or the covered arena. And that would generate roughly 2.7 million gallons of water a year, which is a lot. That's a very highly visible way that we can capture water. Did you know that when we water the rings at the Kentucky Horse Park, we are doing it with Lexington filtered water? You could go to any of our fill stations for our water trucks, put your toothbrush under it, and it's just like you're at home brushing your teeth. It's very inefficient, a very poor use of resources, but that's where we're at. The other thing that we're talking about with water conservation is, I mentioned it before, we sit on a reservoir. There's a large reservoir underneath the horse park. And how do we access that? How do we get to that well water that we could then reuse to water our rings? We spend, with our rings, if we water them one time a day, 34,000 gallons of water. We generally, when they're in use, we water them 3 times a day. That's 102,000 gallons of water per day. So annually, we're running 9.8 million gallons of filtered water on the arena. So if we can tap into that aquifer and pump that water up so that we can then fill the water trucks, then we are saving that resource for later on. But it's got to happen at a very specific time. It takes us 7 to 10 minutes to fill a water truck. So if I'm filling it with a spigot, just a house spigot, you that are riding wanting to go in the ring are not going to be very happy because it's going to take me a while. But we've got to fill that water truck at a very significant rate at about 130 gallons per minute. Lighting upgrades. You know, lighting is one of the things, as I've learned in this ESPC process, that I don't say low-hanging fruit, but it's an easy implementation process that makes it affordable for the energy management company as well as for the user. So as we look throughout the park where there are voids of light at key times, whether they be in parking lots or wherever to make sure it's safe, how do we put LED lighting there? How do we replace old fixtures with new, more current fixtures with less of an energy draw? My concern with this is if we do this, these ESP projects, you finance over a period of time, and we'll talk about that shortly, but I don't want to pay for light bulbs on a finance, right? So I've got to figure out how do we do that and do that appropriately. Rolex Stadium lights, these are the original lights from 2010, 2009 when they were installed. So just an upgrade to that is something that we're considering. And lastly, renewables. You know, one of the things that we've talked about is we do not want to use green space for solar. You know, we want to preserve our green space and protect it. That's a hot button issue, not just in Lexington, but I'm sure in your community. But how do we lean into some of the areas that we can use some solar capacity? One of the things that we've talked about are solar charging canopies in EV charging stations to make that more user-friendly, to begin to capture some of that. One of the things about that particular option for us is that becomes revenue producing for us. You know, if we're able to implement these, have folks get off the interstate and utilize that, then that could be a revenue source for us. I'll pause here and say one of the things I haven't talked about that we're working on with Jackie and the foundation is trees. You know, we want to continue to reinvest in the horse park in that regard to preserve that, to also, you know, bring back the benefits of that, not just trees, but other landscaping. I'm pleased to say that in the last 3 or 4 years, we've planted probably 150 trees throughout the park. And so that's an effort we're going to continue as it goes, but that's not part of this ESPC project. And so then lastly, the considerations. One is the impact. Anything that we do, I want to make sure that it has a positive impact on the horse park, it has a positive impact on the equine community, that we can be kind of an example to others. Again, there's no one-size-fits-all solution, but there is something that everyone can do. The other part of this is financing. How this ESPC project works is this company will go out and secure financing that we, the park, could achieve or receive that would help pay for some of these improvements. Improvements that we know we need, but we can't afford currently because of our budget. And so what would happen is we would pay quarterly over a period of time reimbursement on this financing. When it happened before, Horse Park financed with Bank of America for probably 10 years. We paid about $300,000 annually back to Bank of America for those improvements. And so for us, it's trying to because the ESPC has guaranteed savings. They're going to say to you, hey, Lee, we're going to replace these lights. You're going to get X amount of savings for that, and that's their justification. Now, how they get paid is the difference, right, between our operational cost and their implementation costs. That's how they get paid. Because while I would like to think they're doing it for just being good people, which they are good people, and we'll take away from that, you know, they, like us, have a budget that they have to adhere to. So it's been a very good process. I'm excited for the next 6 months. It's going to kind of drill this down, get us to a better implementation on some of these things, and then we'll move from there. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Scott, much more adept at this than I.
Thank you. I don't know how much more adept I am, but I start with the following. I'm a horseman that spent 40 years judging horse shows, traveling the country, giving clinics, and you know, this has been my life. And I was approached by an amateur hunter rider who was extremely frustrated one morning. She was showing in New York, and she called me out of the blue, and she said, I'm just that crazy amateur. I went to go graze my horse after I showed, and I could not find one piece of clean grass. And I was in the middle of Aiken Horse Park that we were just launching at Bruce's Field, and it was something that I looked around, and she says, well, what are you thinking? And I said, well, we're in the middle of a horse show right now, but let me give this some thought, and I'll get back to you. So I went to the team, and because I've been involved from the beginning of launching the horse park, and I said, maybe we can look at this a little differently. Let's start coming up with some different ideas, so different things that maybe these horsemen who have kids, the riders, Daniel Geithner, Liza Boyd, Hunt Tosh, all these elite riders, but they all have kids. What can we do to inspire the future? How can we get them more involved? So I started, just literally, I hung up the phone, and we were in the middle of a horse show. At every in-gate were those tiny little plastic bottles, and there were a dozen of them sitting on the ground with having 2 sips out of it. I literally, and Mary Choate may remember, I literally picked them up and started watering all the landscaping until Hunt came up to the ring, Daniel came up to the ring. What are you doing? I said, as of now, we're going to create a plastic-free in-gate. And they went, what? Yep, we're going to try this and just see if we could come up with a way. And so after that horse show, we literally went and got the big igloo coolers, and we put it at each in-gate. And yes, we had to continue to fill them up. It was one of those things. But it was in the beginning of this. This was right around COVID when this hit. And so I said to Stephanie, and Stephanie was, again, she's grown up in this. Her family's been involved in horses all her life. And she just said, I'm a mom. I'm looking at it differently now. This is, it's hit our bubble. What can we do? So one thing led to another, and I said, let's take it a little bit further. So all summer long, I said, what can we do at Aiken Horse Park? And the first thing that came up is signage. We started at the brand new wash racks that we had created, and we literally had, in English and Spanish, turn off the hose. It was just as simple as that. We started there. And this is the way this organization has been. Literally, we are grassroots. I spent 40 years judging horse shows. I love my sport, but I want to see this passed on as a sustainable sport. That's the true intention of Green is the New Blue. So she took it further, and she goes, I'm going to create a foundation, and we're going to go with this. So for the rest of the summer, she kept calling me with this idea and that idea. She talked to Joe Fargas at Upperville. She goes, maybe we can start there. So she tiptoed into this. By the time we got to August, and I saw her at Hampton Classic, she goes, I'm a mom, I can't do this. This is about to explode. Would you ever come on board? And I said, I think probably the best way that you can use my services is as a creative director, that maybe I can come up with some different ideas for kids. How do we get the youth? How do we pass this on? So what we started doing is literally, as you can see, we started with a plastic-free in-gate. We started with making it as visible as possible with the dumpster and the recycling bin. And I have to tell you, that was first things first. Every groom, every assistant, every owner started taking note. And all of a sudden, they started to take their plastic or their paper or their cardboard over to the next, anywhere they possibly could that they saw a recycling bin, until we put the big one right there, and it literally sent it home. The next thing we started, down at the lower left, you see Daniel Geithner over our ligustrum jump. They said, well, what else can you do? How about we create a living jump and create a campaign of a living jump? And it continues today. We have Equestrian Gardens with Jess Jones as a partner that's coming up with some great ideas. We have several of the other horse show managers who have their course designers jump on board. We're practicing it right now at Aiken Horse Park. With every single class, we try to always implement a living jump, simply to just keep sending the message. The one thing that I've learned through this is that as we have focused on the kids, the youth right now, they're ready to march on DC. They literally are ready to go to DC and say, we want change. So we had to take it one step further. As you see in the middle there, the Aiken Horse Park aluminum water bottle, that literally came out of how do we make a plastic-free concession stand? Let's just start there. So I tried a dozen different waters. And this was out of northern Georgia, and they handled cruise lines. And they said, you know, we'd love to get involved with you if you could take it a little bit further. So I pitched the idea to the board of directors at the horse park, and we loved that idea because it would really send home the concept of plastic-free concession. As we go a little bit further, as you can see at the far right with, again, refuse to use was another one that we came up with. So they started saying, I talked to some non-equestrian PR people, and they said, just start coming up with things that the kids can jump on, that they can make their own. So that's basically how I went into that direction, is how do we take it to that level? And literally, that, I can't tell you how many times people have come up to me with that, with the lower right, the photo of the wash rack. They're like, it's just so simple, but if we can start sending that message. And I hate to tell you, but we've done the same thing, Hampton Classic, some of the other larger shows. Every manure bin that we get close to, manure only, English and Spanish. Because you look around, as we were just hearing with the Kentucky Horse Park, when you least expect it, there is trash, there's stuff thrown in there, all kinds of things. The most important thing that I've learned is that if I can develop a platform where the kids feel like they are part of it, and then we can start developing movements, going in a direction. So we just basically we're testing everything at first with this. Now as we go to the Upperville Horse Show, that was the first show. Joe Farges came to Stephanie and said, you know, I know you since you were a kid. What do you have here? What is this all about? And she said, well, you know, here we go. Let's talk about it. And so one thing at a time, lower left, ribbon recycling. That has now taken off at every small horse show. We just create a box, put a sign on it, making it so anybody can do this at their horse show. And we have it at all levels. I just, after spending so many years in tiny rings and clinics around the country, or I'd go to these larger organizations and larger facilities, it's all the same. We've got to start thinking about this together and collectively. And that was the first thing that I learned, as well as the other part was making it very clear about where the recycling is. So Upperville took this and ran with it. And in the past 2 years, they've really jumped on board with all of our initiatives. Top right, the big one, shavings bags. And all of us can relate to that. It is our number one, along with the manure, it is our number one. We're chipping away at the refuse to use. We're chipping away at the plastic-free shavings bags. Believe it or not, we started these pallets at the end of every tent. And the grooms started jumping on board. We English and Spanish, put your dry, clean, shaken shavings bags here, because year number one when we got involved, just to see if we could do something with this, they have a huge volunteer committee at Upperville. And I said, hey, why don't you just take 10 of those over to your local recycling facility? Just try. Just see if this would Lo and behold, Loudoun County accepted them, which blew us all away. And I haven't been able to find anybody else since, quite frankly. And we took this a step further. And this was just simply by experimenting. So there is an opportunity as we look at each community, each state, each area, that we can possibly just test the waters a little bit. Been talking to other companies now. How do we go forward and melt them down, do the bullets? There's a whole system that they're looking into more and more. And that led us to Traverse City. And Traverse City has really jumped on board. Matt Morrissey really wanted to take one initiative at a time. He thinks he has a way to hopefully come up with a plan for that. We're working on that. But along with that, we went right ahead with the championships out there. The kids, as you can see, they were all jumping on board. Traverse City took this on themselves and made their own aluminum water bottles just to be able to say these small steps to make a big difference. And then our partner, B&D Builders, have been working on sustainable building for years. And they're very much involved and supportive of Green is the New Blue and our initiatives right now. I didn't even think about that until I sat down with them and I said, here's what we're doing. And they're like, we've been working on this for years. We love this. We want kids, young adults, college kids, they're coming out of college, to realize that there is a place for them to get involved. So more than anything, what I've been working on is trying to figure out a way, how do we get to the point where we literally get the kids on board? And I think that's the part to me that is my biggest concern. They're so concerned right now. So another thing that we did, just as an example, what could we do to get kids to start feeling like more of a community? One thing that we're in the middle of right now is a movement called Bring Your Own. And it literally started by putting a sticker on your water bottle. Every kid has a sticker. Every kid has a water bottle. They say, Scott, we love those stickers. We think it's so great. Well, it's a perfect way to be able to show folks like Yeti, who are so supportive of us right now. They say, we love what you're thinking about because you're making it not only possible for the kids, but it's free. Put a sticker on your water bottle, take a picture of it, tag Green is the New Blue, you become part of the movement. And so we're now looking at other ambassadors. We started with a couple of young ambassadors 2 years ago. One of the young men wrote his essay to get into college, right into Wake Forest, and the dean of admissions said, this is genius, what you have in your sport, that you people are even thinking of this right now. We're tiptoeing into this. But it is a way that we can keep this moving. This is going to, as they say, it's evergreen. It's going to keep going and going and going. And so what I want to do with the next 3 to 5 years is to keep talking about sustainable sport, keep coming up with different ways where we as a community, all horse lovers, can be involved. It's free to put a sticker on your water bottle and take a picture and tag yourself and become part of a movement. And that's our intention with Green is the New Blue. Thanks.
Thanks, you guys, all three. I have a couple starter questions here to get the group warmed up, but I'm sure there's plenty of questions out in the audience. Megan, my first question, once you get settled. Oh yeah, I'll take it around. I can take it around, yeah.
I think it's super cool to see from a tactile perspective of just like what it is. It's like black sand. I'll talk about it more, but.
Okay. I'll pass it around too.
Person?
Okay, so Megan, my first question is for you. Where in your work, consulting with horse shows, events, people, where do you see, I feel like I know the answer to this after listening, but where do you see the most room for improvement in the industry? I feel like the answer is going to be the manure, but maybe I will be surprised. And how do you, Lee touched on this, but I think it's a really important piece of this conversation is how do you look at budget constraints and help people find ways to activate sustainable solutions within a reasonable budget, knowing that budgets are tight, it is an expense. Like what guidance do you give to people when you're looking at big projects to tackle like manure?
Okay, so I'll do the two. I might need a reminder on the second one after
Yeah.
I do the first for a second. But all great questions. And I think, the manure is a big one. We can break it down into the different sections and what's the most important because there's the energy, there's water, waste, and like they're all equally important to some extent, but some have a higher usage that could be related to like what the carbon usage is. But I think like from a what is our biggest problem standpoint, I have a little bit of a different answer, and I think that's on the coordination and sequencing of working together to get things happening. I think one of the biggest challenges is that there is such a enthusiasm to do things, but people don't really know where to start. They don't know who to go to. They don't know how to work together to make it happen. And maybe I'll give an example just because it's like, something as simple as trying to put in a water station at a horse show touches so many different pieces of the organization. And that just shows how the coordination is so important and you need people aligned on the same mission, because if you don't have someone who's in the catering department aligned with the mission, they're gonna be putting their heels in the ground and saying, I'm not really sure if I wanna change what I'm doing because of what you're doing. So as an example of putting water stations in, well then, we wanna put these in, then that starts to affect the budget of the cafes because they're not selling as much water. So you're then working with the vendors and you're working with the sponsorship team to say, how do we start to use, like, you know, we're being creative and say, how do we use the screens to promote the cafe? And then you're working with the operations and the facilities team to actually get it on site. So to do one simple, you know, it seems simple to implement one thing that's a water station, but it takes a coordination of 7 different groups within the horse show group of organizers. So I think my answer would be is getting everyone on the same page, and the coordination is the hardest piece to make sure everyone's working together. And just truthfully, we have so much else on our plates at the horse shows that seem to take a higher priority, that everyone wants to do this, but it slips down to the bottom. It's a nice to have, but not a need to have. Yeah. We need good footing. We need the water to work. We need, you know, horses not doing 1 strides and 2 strides. Like, there are other things that are a higher priority that then we want people to be champions within each space to move it up the ladder. And then the budget side is a little bit of a tougher question. It depends on, you know, it's different for each of those categories that I shared, and I think that there are ways to solve it for each category. Whether it's switching from plastic water bottles to something different, there could be an individual sponsor, and that could be someone's name, or it could be someone to come up and say, okay, it does cost a little bit more to do a more sustainable solution. How do we make up that difference? And it can be an individual, it can be a sponsor, find it somewhere in the budget. The manure side is different just because, like, for these huge systems, they're really expensive, and that's why it's so difficult, is these are $15 million systems to do some of these processes, and it's a gasifier, it's a drum dryer, you have to think about all the logistics for it, so you need to make the economics work. I think I was talking last night about, like, my dream for the horse world would be, say, how do we get these huge $15 million systems down to be something that can be at individual barns? And I think of it as like the supercomputer that they had, and then now we have your MacBooks. Right now we're at the supercomputer level with these muck processing systems, and they don't quite work from an economic standpoint at a smaller level. And I feel like I could touch on the other places for budget, but I think it's community, I think sponsors, how do we start to get more sponsors and people helping to make up that difference for different budget pieces? And then, you know, what Lee talked about, the ESPC, I am very hopeful and excited, and I believe in serendipity, that I think it is great that the Kentucky Horse Park is the one that's kind of saying, like, hey, let's step up and see if we can do this, because before US Equestrian Federation or the Dressage Foundations come in and say, like, hey, you need to be more green, we need to show that we can do it and give some examples before we put some rules in place. And it's proving, hopefully, with the ESPC, with the priorities that they're putting out, is that you can actually pay for it by creating the savings over time. And that's what these budgets will really show through the Kentucky Horse Park.
That's great, Megan. Thank you. And Lee, my next question is for you. And we all kind of were sitting here. You could kind of hear the oohs and ahs in the crowd when you were contextualizing the numbers from the horse park. As you noted, you know, this is something new for you that you've learned in your role. What are some of the most important crossings of learnings that you've had that you think could be applied from, like, a best practices standpoint across the industry?
You know, I think first is getting to know the numbers, right? I think if you just kind of got to know how your operation is running to then begin to see, okay, how can we make it better? So I think digging down into, hey, what's our sewer capacity? What's our water? What's our, muck? All those kinds of things. So I think unless you really spend time diving into the problem areas of your operation, you're going to have a hard time taking that next step. And then I think it just becomes, how do you engage those much more knowledgeable than yourself as a resource? There's no one set approach, and the famous saying, "How do you eat an elephant?" One bite at a time, and I think that's what this is, because it's an elephant to try to figure out how do you operate better, how do you address some sustainability things, but you've just got to take it in very small increments, and then build from there. And so I think for me, that's been it. First, just figuring out, hey, how do we operate? Where are those issues? And then progress.
Can I add just quickly to that. I think, we're horse people, and the people that are running these organizations, or as the horse shows, they don't look at the electricity bills and know what's right or wrong. They just pay the bills most of the time. Most of the horse shows that I've talked to, they're like, I don't even know how to log into my utility account. They've never looked at it. They just pay the bills. So finding people that can come in, like the Schneider Electrics, is so great that it's all under one umbrella to come in and say, ooh, like, this is weird that you're having these numbers in this specific place be different. And it's just like, we need the translators too, between someone coming in to help and look at it. And like the Schneider guys call me now, they're like, hey, can you bathe horses with rainwater? Hey, what's the actual schedule of like how you fill up the water trucks and like bring them to the rings? So to be there as a translator too for these groups to come in and do the development. Horses are something that they're just not aware of. So if you're thinking about putting solar on the roof, you have to tell them, it's like, you can't do that when horses are in the stall. We need to coordinate schedules. We need to not have nails on the ground, and just, there's a translation process too, I think, that happens between people that are the engineers and the people putting it together and connecting that with what needs to happen on site. Sorry, thank you.
And Scott, I have a question for you before we open it up for the floor. It feels like for Green is the New Blue, you guys are super invested in communicating with the community and getting people's buy-in on site, in person. What is the biggest, what's the best piece of feedback that you've received from a competitor or from an exhibitor at a show that you guys have been activating at that's really made you think?
That's a good question. The first thing that I'd have to say is that when we started these initiatives that were in your face, hate to say it, but they were. From day one, the non-equestrian PR people said, the best thing that you can do is create not only just a direction, but give them the signage. And English and Spanish, I go back to that again, very, very important. But it became very clear to me that we may assume people remembered to turn off the hose. We may assume at the end of the day at Aiken Horse Park we like to turn off the lights in the permanent barns at night. It wasn't happening. So literally, signage, signage, signage. I hate to say it, but we really did, and just keep putting it in front of their face. And again, the other part was, the best suggestion was come up with those hashtags, come up with those things. Hashtag sustainable sport came out in year 2, and all of a sudden we had several other organizations coming us to a great idea. So it was more about, what are we putting out there? What is our direction? What's the intention? And along with that, the social media. The kids are all about the social media. And so every time we've created a new initiative, a new challenge, a new way to bring them on board, we connect it to the social media, because that's the way the kids speak today.
And I have one last question if you guys want to touch on it, and then we'll open it up, and it's a loaded one, and hopefully is a generator of conversation. Where do you guys see this movement in 10 years? Where do you hope to see it? What do you hope to see come out of this if we're looking at a longer term scale? Obviously there's short term wins, but what would be a big long term win for you guys looking for 2036?
That's very much a loaded question, because I was actually thinking about that as I was coming down, because in 10 years, I think back to where the park did their program 15 years ago, and the technology has changed so much in that last 15 years that as I think about this current ESPC and what we're going to commit to for a period of 10 or 12 years, what is it that's going to be out of date by the time it even comes to an end, right? Because you want to make sure you're doing the right thing and you're current, but we're going to commit ourselves to certain things that in 10 years are going to be obsolete, right? So that's actually a challenge for me as I think about it, because I know we've got to make that improvement now, but I also know that in 10 years there's going to be a better method. And so my hope is that the park has moved itself forward and begun to address some of these issues, but then at the same time that we're ready in 10 years to update again, right? Because I think technology is going to move us that far. It's like the supercomputer in muck, right? I think that's where we're going.
Yeah, I think 10 years, 20 years out, that's how sustainability thinks in terms of timelines. And Sorry. I don't think we're behind in starting now and thinking about 10 years as being a long time, but it gives us a good space to look at other sports. And I actually have talked to the head of sustainability for these different sports, and it takes about 10 years to get to a significant level of change. So the head of NASCAR, the head of the NHL, and it's just like you start with the different pieces, and I think we're doing great steps. Number one here with youth movements, and let's get the awareness going. Let's get one venue started. My goal and my dream would be to, like, you know, from a US equestrian and just sports standpoint, let's get the right working groups together to say, let's put together a strategy and a 3-year to 5-year plan that we can start to execute and say, what are the learnings from the Kentucky Horse Park? How do we scale that to other horse shows and share what we're doing so that more horse shows could do it? And I've definitely ChatGPT'd at some point, like, how many barns are in the US? How much energy would it be if we put solar on every single barn? And I think we can start to just multiply the efforts of what we're doing at one barn, at one horse show, to more and more and more, and share those learnings and make it as easy as possible for more shows and competitions and venues to be implementing that, so that in 10 years we have a set of plans laid out, some priorities and ways to easily implement them for barns as they're, one, being built from the ground up to be as sustainable as possible, and two, how do we keep retrofitting the barns and venues that are out there as quickly and easily as possible.
I totally agree, and I think the other thing that I'm personally feeling and more aware of than ever, we're taking small steps, very small steps. I can't tell you how many phone calls Stephanie constantly says, you have to talk to more people, because I'm listening. I know at one point or another there's going to be, oh, that's a great one. Let's take that to the next level. Or how about this idea? I have a dream, and that is that shavings bag is going to have a purpose, one way or another. It's going to have a purpose. Same thing with the manure. Same thing with the plastic-free concession stand. How about all the vendors at the horse show come together? We're working on possibly creating something this winter at the Winter Equestrian Festival where we're going to call it a Bring Your Own Day and get all vendors involved. We did this at Washington, Vicki, when we brought in the nylon bag on that. I think it was Thursday or Friday night. Kim Tudor came up with the idea. She says, let's make it a night where every time somebody buys something from the merchant shop at Washington, they get bring your own bag, and it's a reusable nylon bag. And the place went crazy. I mean, we had so much fun. I mean, the next thing I know, there were reels of these ladies, I'm going to buy one more thing so I can get another bag. But this is something that, you know, Green is the New Blue can do in order to keep the momentum. You know, this year of the horse, it's about momentum. Let's see what we can do in creating some action more than anything.
Awesome. Okay, we'll open it up to the floor for questions. Rob, first hand closest to me.
Yeah, hey, Rob from US Eventing. One comment, one question. So the comment, you know, I had a previous career, and a lot of what, you know, we talked about was utilizing the green industry, landscaping and nursery as the pass on, because they could use a less processed manure / dry manure product for what they're doing. But it does seem like there was always just one step missing, that we needed an industry partner or somebody to step in. So that's just a comment. But beyond that, my question is, as we go back to our competitions or facilities, what is the one most simple thing, least cost prohibitive thing we could do to make our competitions more green and better for the environment?
From a venue standpoint, I'll answer it from that, and I think that's really where Scott's efforts come in, right? Because I can't say to an organizer, we can talk about it, and I can say, hey, organizer, we really want you to do X, Y, and Z, right? But if that organizer hasn't bought in to the baseline things that Green is the New Blue is promoting and just sustainability, then it's for naught. I mean, I can do all the sewer and electrical and manure and whatever, but if they don't see the importance of it, I can't mandate that. Because the organizer, are the ones that communicate to them, the competitor, right? So to me, it's with Scott in that audience to say, hey, look, as an organizer, let's embrace it. Let's get behind it. and then it just kind of grows from there. So that would be what I might say.
I think mine would be for each organizer is just to identify a champion within the organization that can be the one who can start to set the priorities. Because you can say water bottles, you can say let's look at the energy and all these, but I think like one of the best things to do is identify one person that wants to, you know, take that initiative and carry it as their own and bring everyone else on board and start to set those priorities. Because if you have one person at each organization that's working on it, then you can go through those steps of, you know, look at the audit, let's make a strategy, let's implement. So I think it's more of a people answer for me of identify a champion at these shows and have that person be the one to help figure out what the best next steps are.
I've got a question. I'll preface it with a comment. First, access to water, especially free water, is probably the #1 driver for eliminating medical encounters at any outdoor event, especially when temperatures are in excess of 70 degrees. And we also know that water sales is a huge revenue generator when temperatures are in excess of 70 degrees. How do you balance the need for revenue generation and access to water?
So I would say, you know, we want to make water available at the horse park. So you'll laugh at this. So we just, as many of you may know, we built a couple new barns, you know, opened them August 23, whatever it was, doesn't matter. Put water fountains in each. Competitors and grooms chose to use those as drying racks for their saddle pads. And so, you know, they were, you know, refillable stations, all these kinds of things. So for us, you know, yes, water, we do get money off of that, but we do try to make it available in the barn area, especially, it's just, again, getting the grooms, the riders, and all to use it as it's intended. But you know, it's one of those things that, again, I think it's available. I think it's important, especially in the heat of the summer, that's there.
I'll add to that because I was in those barns for the past 2 summers, and when we were at the championship shows, and I said to my PR team, I was like, okay, you all are going to think I'm crazy, but I'm going to take pictures of these LK water refill stations. Why? Because people don't even know they are there. And that was the thing that we need. We need to identify the ability to go and fill up your water bottle. So I'd be on my bike and I'd go over to the Rolex ring, then come back and I'd fill up and I would just start. I mean, and they keep telling me, just take a picture, just take a picture. And it's about identifying it. That's a big deal that they put these in these barns. And I just can't reiterate enough how much we've got to sell the idea to our public. Because unfortunately, in our community, sometimes we just happen to walk by or throw a towel on or throw a saddle pad. Identifying it is most important right now. The other thing is, we dealt with this at Bruce's Field at Aiken Horse Park. The team came to me from the concession stand. They said, okay, what are we going to do about this now that you have water refill stations at every ring? And I said, how about the idea of this aluminum water bottle? Make it something that they can take with them and that they can refill at the ring. Because 9 times out of 10, when they were coming, and we did a study on this, when they were coming to buy their breakfast or their lunch, they'd always grab one of those water bottles because it was cold, great water, and they were able to sit down and then they put it in their back pocket and go to the ring to the next class. They can refill at the in gate. So it's kind of more along that line that I found it through my experience.
Hi. Our county already has a recycling plant right in the county. So how do we connect the dots between getting our venue to save everything and get it transported to the recycling plant? I mean, we have to figure out how to connect the dots. How do you go about that?
This is something that I started out trying to boil the ocean with carbon hoof print. I'm like, I just want to solve everything all at once, all the time, and but realized that like the recycling piece isn't that scalable because you have to connect on a local level with those recycling plants. So I've done that with a few, like more so down in Florida, and it's honestly connecting with them. Everyone that I have ever called, they pick up the phone and can have a wonderful conversation. They will tell you what the different streams are and what the access is and how often they pick up, and they can set it up for you. So then there's a budget aspect to it also that I would encourage people to look at, that like you can save money on your trash budget by separating out your aluminums, which you're getting money back for, your cardboard, which is taking away weight from your trash, and the recycling companies will help you figure that out and understand what the streams are. So there's not a single answer that's going to work for every county, because every county's system does it differently for how they separate and recycle. But just from my past experience, they've always picked up the phone and helped to understand what the buckets are, and then it's a matter of getting those bins and creating the streams and hopefully setting it up so that you can do it.
So I'm going to, it's Katie, and I'm right here. So I'm going to kind of take this in a little bit different direction because Lee already can predict my question is going to be biosecurity related. So from a sustainability, I agree totally with the signage and perspective, because that is something that's going to work in the social media. But how do you incorporate, and are there any ideas out there right now on how to incorporate some of the health, human health and horse health perspectives into this sustainability?
Katie, I don't know the answer to that question. Why you ask that at 10:15 in the morning? But since you did ask, I'm gonna tell you you should be proud of me, in general, but specifically, when we were going through this ESPC process, one of the discussions around muck was, hey, how is the horse park willing to bring in outside muck to have a large processing plant? And that was Megan's question. My response was no, because it's a very much a biosecurity issue. So I think you would be proud of that.
I'm very proud.
You're welcome. But I think, in terms of how you connect between the two, again, it's making sure that you treat everybody separately. Make sure that, hey, you're treating and setting up process so you don't have that cross contamination and reduce that. I think, to me, that's the biggest thing. The sharps needles, the muck, to make sure it all kind of is in their space. I don't know beyond that if there's anything larger. Megan or Scott may know, but I think those would be the things I would look at.
And I can speak to the muck point too, and maybe we should chat also, because as some of these new processes are coming to be, like there's a huge aspect of it that's in addition to the biochar is this idea of recycled shavings. And I know it's been talked about for years, but there is a way to go through the process, and it sanitizes the shavings. It separates the muck, the actual manure, from the shavings, and then it can be sanitized and resold at half the price. And we're going through, or I have third-party testing in hand that says this is safe. This is very safe. It's actually has lower levels than what a unprocessed, just out of the plastic bag of shavings would have for certain numbers. I have a sister who's very, I would say, nervous of germs, and I asked her about this, and she's a vet tech, and she's like, oh, I'd be totally fine to use that for my horses. So that was my biggest, okay, this will be good to use, but it brings up a good question to the community, and one that I'm kind of starting to try to raise awareness of, and would like to start a movement also of how do we help to ensure that people know that something like this is safe and start to use it, so that processes and plants like this get built, because the economics don't work if people aren't buying these recycled shavings. And hopefully there's a huge market out there of people that want to buy their shavings at $3 a bag versus $7 a bag. But how do we know, and what's the stamp that we can put on it that says this is safe to use? And I don't know if there's one that we can develop, or if there's one that actually is out there that exists, because they have these USDA or organic ones, but there's nothing that exists that I know of right now that's a horse show approved one. So I'm kind of in the process of that, and would love input from people on what is a stamp that we can put on something like that that will make people feel comfortable and not cause any issues from a health standpoint, both people or horses. But it's something that needs to happen so that projects like this can work.
I'm coming. Hold on. Right here, behind you.
So we've talked a bit about the stumbling block of wood shavings. We can't find anybody to take our manure because of the wood shavings. And we've talked about the plastic bags. I mean, the big issue for us is dealing with that product. The only other alternative is pellets, which don't really work for our situation that I know of. I mean, is there any innovation going on to maybe, instead of coming up with all these solutions for the problem, actually doing something about the problem itself, which is the wood shavings? Is there any other bedding solution coming on board or any research being done?
There are a lot of alternatives that are in place, and again, it's kind of about adoption. And I think what I've seen, so there's hemp bedding, people are starting to use cardboard. Sometimes it's because horses have allergies and it's less dusty. Like, there are reasons for it. The hemp people that are using it, it's a sustainability way. But like, the challenge that's happened so far is these companies that try those out haven't necessarily been making it, because they're a little bit more expensive. So they're leaning on, hey, can we have people buy this because it's a more sustainable option? But then also there's just the logistical challenges too, because you might be an individual, or at least this is what I found, is like, you're an individual at your barn that says, I want to use a more sustainable option for my horse, whether that's, you know, a certain type of shavings, but you're part of a barn that has 25 horses. So you're now asking your barn manager to import like a different type of shavings and especially do it for your horse. Like, it's hard with the systems, it's a challenge too, but I don't want to be negative and say that there isn't anything that's being done, because there are. I just want to see them be successful, and I've only seen it in small pieces with these hemp shavings, and the cardboard is becoming very popular. I'm not sure exactly like where that's headed, but like the number one in the world of show jumping has been using that for his horses, which is pretty cool. And so I think we'll see more coming to be, but it's a matter of adoption. We need enough people to adopt those solutions for them to work, because they've been being tried and tried and tried. But I'd love to send you some of the ones that I know of that are out there.
We just need to make sure those hemp shavings are approved by USEF for any after competition drug tests. Just make sure we're all good there.
Do we have any other questions that I missed? Yeah. No, go ahead.
Can you explain a little bit more, Scott, about your living jump?
Sure. And this is something that we started literally for the hunter industry as a way to explain to either our course designer, horse show managers, anybody involved, that there's an opportunity simply as a talking point. What would it be like in Upperville? We actually used Upperville in the beginning to test a lot of this, as well as Aiken Horse Park. We literally took, in the beginning of the Aiken Horse Park, we needed to surround all of the arenas with some sort of landscaping, and it was agreed upon that Ligustrum is very happy in Aiken, South Carolina. So we started to experiment, and Daniel Geithner was my guinea pig, and I literally took 40 Ligustrum short trees, jumpable size, and made a inviting jump, literally just with a rail on top. And one thing led to another where people were really taking to it. They're like, that's a great idea. And again, it's simply a talking point. The kids now at the lower levels are coming up with, they're upcycling trash and making cool things. They're painting them. They're coming up with little ideas for a brush box or a flower box, but made out of something else. They're taking ideas of ours. Bill Rube with Glen Eyre, with his therapeutic riding center, is now doing for his it's their fundraiser for the riding center, but he does his derbies all, and the kids make all living jumps in the fall. The pumpkins and the thises, and they go all out. But it's another way to get the community involved. And I tell you what, the landscaping companies love it, because now we bring them in as well, and they become part of it. It's community based, and I've learned that in Aiken. It's a horse crazy town, but there's several landscaping companies that had never been involved ever. And the hardest part with Aiken in the beginning is that they were 12 years ago, very stuck in their own, old school ways. So I had to, again, tiptoe into this, and that was one of them where immediately I got a huge support from the community. So it's a way that we can also stay out in the public that, unfortunately, we do use a lot of plastic flowers and this and that. Well, if we can just start with one jump at a time, and we even this past winter in Florida with Jess Jones, she started her company called Equestrian Gardens. And I said, how about jumping on board with us? And she came up with this thing called the living log. What are you doing? She was like, watch. And she literally carved out the middle of a log and then just planted. It was not spooky for the horses at all. It was actually very inviting because then she took at the base of it, underneath it, she just filled it with some ferns, just some living plants. Very jumpable. And again, we've got to start changing it up any way we can.
Any other questions before we wrap up? Great. Yeah, go ahead, Megan.
I'm sorry, my brain obviously keeps exploding with ideas a little bit here, but I just wanted to go back to the 10-year vision before we wrap up too, and just say I think there are so many things that we can try to do and talk about in each of the verticals and categories, but I think like a guide to look towards too is like I would really love for venues to start to look at sustainability as like a point of pride for them. I think right now it's a challenge and it's something that's kind of like a headache, but like how do we start to get to a point where we think of best-in-class, world-class horse shows are ones that include sustainability. That's how I think of it. And I think you can't be world-class without having that in mind. So I just wanted to add that piece to the 10-year conversation of, I think it would be so cool in the future at these awards and in different sessions to really recognize people that are doing well and have it be a differentiation point for certain shows to say, oh, I kind of want to go to this one because they're doing things better. So have it be a source of pride versus headache 10 years down the road.
Great. Do you guys, Scott, Lee, have any closing? Okay. Awesome. Well, thanks you guys for joining us this morning. Very great conversation. And if you guys do have any questions, obviously these three will be here, so you can pull them aside